All right, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to have Obina and Coley here from CareerWise Colorado. And today we're going to be talking about inclusive interviews, how to create them and why they're important. If you're new here, my name is Alexandria. I'm the co-founder of The Disruptors and an executive leadership coach. I'm a professional pivoter who started my adult career as a therapist. I moved into the tech space and then bridged the two worlds with coaching, which is what I'm doing now. My personal mission is to disrupt systemic inequities and creating a more sustainable way of working for the future because we all need to thrive. And I'm excited to do that with my co-founder, Jasleen. I'll let her introduce herself.
Yeah, so I'm Jasleen. I am a career coach. I spent almost a decade working in corporate HR for a large oil and gas firm. And I've kind of pivoted now to tech as well. I have an educational background in psychology. I'm really passionate about talking about the invisible rules and invisible bias. And I know we're going to talk a lot about that today. So I'm excited. And as Alexandria mentioned, I am the co-founder here at The Disruptors. We're super passionate about finding DEI solutions for folks that are sustainable so that we're not, picking up a DEI project and then moving on and having no systemic change. So we're really looking at how we're truly moving the dial on DEI, how we're creating systems and ecosystem around it. And so this is a very good topic that falls under one of our main pillars, which is talent. And so really understanding, do we have a diverse workforce? What are some of the barriers to diversity? How are we really building a pipeline that is built from an equity lens, as well as is supporting the business and where it needs to go, because the business needs to understand the people. And so really integrating that piece. So I'll pass it off to Coley to introduce yourself.
Hi, I am Coley Jamerson. I work at CareerWise Colorado as a program manager for related instruction. So all of the upskilling that apprentices do while they're doing their on-the-job learning, it kind of hangs out in my arena, and I work closely with Obina.
Hello. Greetings. My name is Obina Onyali. I'm the Director of Educational Partnerships for CareerWise. And my job is to, aside from just working with the phenomenal Coley, my job is to really make sure that our organization it's a recruitment engine for the organization, and the partnership in terms of educational partnerships. So it's a little bit of both. We build the educational partnerships, and then we recruit those students from those different schools as well. So education is the thing, and been a part of it for some time now. So.
Yeah, and I actually want to talk a little bit, like real quick, about CareerWise because it's always, I personally love the company and the program and everything that they're doing, and it's important to be able to get that more out into the world. So do you want to share a little bit about what CareerWise does, and then we can dive into the presentation today?
Yeah, for sure. So we are a youth-based apprenticeship program. So that's an opportunity where we connect market businesses within the city of Denver, Fort Collins, Pueblo, even nationally as well, to opportunities for students. So young students, usually between 16 to 18, eventually venturing out a little bit more than that. But for students who are seeking other alternatives in terms of the educational pathway. And the idea of college or bust is we're trying to disseminate that and dissolve that, and realizing that there's opportunities and there's options that can multiply what somebody can do. And a lot of our students don't want, the college isn't their end goal. So it's like, how do we make sure that we build a pipeline from the educational world while the students are in high school to those businesses who are seeking to enhance, expose, expand their organization, and how they bring in folks and bring in new talent. And so I think it's an interesting new talent pipeline that's starting younger and bringing a little bit older as well. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, the mission of CareerWise Colorado, one of my favorite companies, definitely an evangelist for the program there. So
Beautiful.
Today we're talking about inclusive interviewing. And the first thing that I want to address is, why is cultivating an inclusive interview, like from the forefront, so important?
Go ahead.
I think it just sets the tone, right? Like it sets the tone for a person's experience in an organization, kind of like displaying internally what values are, what's important to an organization. And so we have really been intentional in supporting that effort for our business partners.
Yeah. I think it's also important to realize that there's a change in, there's a change, there's an era of change that's happening with a lot of businesses, and they're realizing we need to, like I said earlier, in terms of the diversifying of talent, I think that's what it is. They're realizing, okay, the population that was here, that was working, is starting to retire, starting to move out. And there's so many new creative individuals coming in who are ready to start. And is education a stopping block a little bit? So it's just like, well, how do we make sure that we are, as Chloe said, bringing in, like, truly being that inclusiveness all together, and showing that there's new ways to learn, to grow in business and education as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that employers are caring more about it. Like when I started out in HR over 20 years ago, it was sometimes hard to convince folks that diversity mattered. And even when you did convince them, it was like going out to universities and, well, the diversity is not there. And so I love how you guys are talking about building that pipeline to be even younger, attracting folks into the industry and understanding, okay, where is that disconnect? What is that gap? And so what have you guys learned in terms of those gaps?
That it's tough. I mean, that's the biggest thing. It's tough because you're having to understand and adjust to two different ecosystems. And I think that it's when we're having to show, hey, business, this is what the educational world looks like. Hey, education, this is what the business world looks like. You have your own ways, but yet there's ways to merge them and bring them together at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's something they don't teach you in school when you're navigating what degree should I take, what course should I take, what career path should I take. It's really hard to start connecting the dots when no one has been there to teach you what that means.
Or what your options even are, right? Like if you don't have any representation around you of what the options are, like it's going to be, oh, well, this is what's meant for me or what I'm supposed to do or what I can do. Whereas if you're surrounded by different options, then you get to be like, oh, well, what do I actually want? What do I actually like? What are my strengths setting me up for good success in? And how do I want to achieve that? Like it just opens up a whole lot of conversation. So I know you have a great presentation. I have seen it a couple of times. It's one of my favorites. It's super good. So I want to invite Obinna to go ahead and share his screen and dive in.
Here we go.
And while you're loading the screen there, I'll just mention if you're listening to this in podcast form, we're going to put the link in the comments to where we're posting this on LinkedIn so that you can see the slides.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. I skipped a couple. We're gonna skip some of the videos because that's, there's no need for any of that at this moment in time. So one of the biggest things, I think is starting off. This is kind of the stuff that we walk everybody through. We walk them through doing a self-check-in. And the self-check-in, I think, is important at any moment that you're entering in a new space, a new opportunity, experience in general, is to say, okay, let me just kind of pause for a moment, see where I am and what I'm trying to do in this space. And that's what we want people to do, is say, you know what, I know this is going to be a tough concept, but check in with yourselves and be present. And I think that's the biggest thing, is we encourage them to be present. So that means making sure that their camera's on, making sure that they're really engaged with what's happening, because that is, it's the idea of top down, is in terms of like, if you're at the top understanding what's going on. So when the students and the youth come in to your organization, there's that sense, they have a sense of a safe space, knowing that, okay, they have done the person above me, my supervisor, whomever it may be, has done their due diligence to understand what it takes to bring somebody like me into their organization. Then we go into, I'm going to have Chloe talk about addressing bias in the highest training, and then I'll talk about foundational inclusion for the first 2 weeks, because we know the first 2 weeks is really, really important. And so again, this is the biggest thing. We stop here and say, embrace the journey, because we're all going to be on a journey itself. And Chloe, I don't know if you want to briefly talk about some of the highways that kind of lead into embracing the journey.
Right. So we kind of learned about this framework about everyone's kind of on the freeway of racial justice, and some people are in the HOV lane. That means they're actively working with other organizations to disrupt these systems. Some people are in the fast lane, some people in the middle lane, some people in the slow lane, and we change lanes, right? As we learn, we grow. There's ebbs and flows, and so we're changing lanes, and wherever someone is in their journey is the right place to be at the time. And so to really kind of understand that, and to it helps us kind of understand where people kind of see themselves in this work. And sometimes it changes the conversation, it elevates it, we go a little deeper. And sometimes we pull back and we start kind of just building the foundational bricks to be successful in this work.
Beautiful. So how about this? How about if we do a little self-check-in? We're just take a minute and say, and, you know, I want us in this space right now to also do that self-check-in to make sure that we're saying, okay, I'm here to understand, to learn, to gain knowledge. Luckily, I think all four of us are in, I would say we're in the HOV lane. You know, definitely because we're able to move, like Polly said, able to move in between. But there are I think there's moments I think in my life where I was in the slow lane because maybe I didn't have the capacity or I wasn't, you know, I wasn't able to, you know, reach down and get the information that I need. So making sure that us, even in this conversation right now, are doing that self-check-in and to make sure that we're here and we're present for what we're going to talk about today as well.
Yeah.
So.
I love that. I love that analogy of the lanes. For me, I find that I to just coast in my lane, if you will. So I always like to kind of find the similarities that I have with people in the other lane so that I know where my work still is.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Because I'm like, because there was a time where I think I was thinking I was in the HOV lane and I was coasting and I'm like, these other people don't get it.
Yeah.
And then I kind of said, wait, like, I forget who said it, but somebody said something about like, you got to find out like what you have in common with people who are racist, with people who are, you know, all the isms, all the phobia. So when I started doing that, that was when I started realizing I still have more work to do. I have another lane over here that I didn't even realize existed.
Yeah, that definitely resonates. And like, I know that the way I was raised put me in the slow lane real hard. And it was a fight to move out of that lane and to like really be like, oh, I know that like what they're teaching me, like now, like I don't want that. But then not really knowing how to turn on that blinker and get into another lane. Like it took a while to really do that. And then even knowing like within the work that I did start doing, there was some switching and like sometimes it felt easeful and like being in the fast lane and like going and going and going and like, okay, this makes sense. And then all of a sudden you hit right the traffic stopped and then you end up back in the slow lane. And so even just like being comfortable with self and being in the moment of, hey, this is okay as long as I keep going and like keep unpacking and keep on the journey, because that's
and if we're going too fast, what about the people in the other lane? They're not going to be able to catch up.
Right.
And then how do we get people on the journey of getting to, you know, a place where we're going to see that tipping point, where we're going to see the systemic change happen?
Yeah, have more people in the HOV all in the car together.
Right.
Or no lanes at all. It's just messy.
Yeah,
We're
all over. And if
yeah.
And will you have access to those lanes too? And I think that's the other thing too, just like understanding what the equitability of access is too. So
not gatekeeping the lane. We can go on with this out.
I know. That's why it's such a good topic. That's why it's such a good thing that we can bring in, and we don't, as you know, Alexandra, we don't touch much on it, but it's just, and there's a cute little video that goes with it to visually show folks what it looks like. But you know, it is as long as we recognize it. And I think that's the whole point of when we start, is like, you got to self-check in before we begin, because you may get stuck. You may think, oh, I'm doing all right. And then through this presentation, I think a lot of people have noticed that they're not in the lane that they thought they were in, like you were saying earlier. So,
yeah.
All right, Ms. Coley.
Oh, yes, this is me. So addressing bias in the hiring process. So we're going to talk a little bit about implicit bias, right? And so those are unintentional harmful for the recipients, impacts on our workspaces and systems overall. And they're usually like kind of these snap judgments we're making on people based off of their background, their culture, their environment, personal experiences that we bring in, kind of affect this. We have a little video we show after this that talks a little bit about implicit bias, but digs into it. I love this visual that the 4 levels of racism. I think that this has helped me. This was one of the times where like I switched lanes because I was like, wow, look at this. I've learned something new. And so this has really kind of helped me shift my thinking when we're talking about systems change versus people changes. Mm-hmm. And how these things manifest. And so the 4 levels are personal, interpersonal, institutional, and structural. And for this conversation specifically, we are talking about institutional. So what has a business really incorporated into their hiring, into their policies that might allow bias to show up in these processes?
I love this. I feel like these levels are not mutually exclusive either. And I think it's important for people to not be like, well, I'm not biased, I'm not racist. Like until we all accept that we have internalized that as a result of the institutional racism and structural and interpersonal racism. It's so ingrained in us that it would be impossible, even for us that feel like we might be in the HOV lane. Even for us, it still lives there somewhere, like there. And you just have to be more aware of when it shows up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is
it's the activation. It's the activation. Yeah, definitely. All right, Colby.
So again, we're talking today about institutional. So we're talking about policies, practices within organizations and institutions. I do think that sometimes when you're talking specifically about the hiring manager, the person making the decision, sometimes personal can filter into that. But primarily, we can create policies, procedures, the way we ask questions that kind of can filter some of that personal out. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is an actual scenario that happened. I'm going to read it for our friends who can't see it, but these are project coordinator interview scenarios. Okay, so both interviews are conducted by the same supervisor who is a white female. So our first candidate is Ashley. She's a white female. Her resume shows school-based extracurriculars, debate club, and sports. She's on time for her interview. The interview questions led to conversation about her experience as a student athlete. The supervisor really related to Ashley's interview responses, as she was also a student athlete and understands the work ethic, teamwork, and responsibility level required. So that's our first candidate. Our second candidate is Raymond. He's a Black male. He has no school-based extracurriculars on his resume. He was late for the interview. The interview questions led to conversation about his YouTube channel and the music review videos he creates. And the supervisor had a difficult time extrapolating relevant skills experience from his resume and interview. So what are your thoughts about these 2 candidates just based off of this?
Jasleen, I'm going to let you go first because I have the answers already.
She's like, I know already.
Well, I feel like, the candidate 1 comes from a lot of privilege. And so, I mean, not to center myself in it, but I've gone through an exercise before, kind of like those Jubilee scenarios where you step forward if you have the privilege and if you don't. And I did this exercise in a room full of mostly white folks. Actually, there were a lot of women in the room because when I was in HR, it was really woman dominated. But a lot of these looked like the questions they asked when we were talking about privilege. And I was actually in the very back of the room at the end of the exercise, along with another woman of color who we were not on the sports teams. We were not institutionalized into this way of thinking of time as linear instead of like from our own cultural norms about time. And also like not having, and again, I'm making assumptions now based on the privilege, but I think the thoughts that come to my mind are that not everybody has had a relative who has gone into the corporate world. And so when you're the first in your family to go into that, it's harder for you to connect and help people understand what you can do for them and what your skills, how they relate to your business goals. And obviously I'm biased because I'm a career coach. So I help people with how they're positioning themselves. But I think where one is just, there's a lot of elitism there where with the schooling and the education. And the other one, I think what might get missed with candidate number 2 is the grit, the ability to like actually connect with real people that aren't, like the people who work in the organization, especially when you think about YouTube, because I mean, you really need to learn how to connect with your audience there. And so I don't know if that was the answer you were looking for, but I feel like there would be a lot to kind of to unpack in terms of like, what are we actually looking for from the candidate, and how are we first looking at our criteria and see if our criteria is biased and elitist and coming from, again, all the isms and OBS and then also looking at, okay, how could this look different? How could this show up in different ways? And how might we look at it also from an equity lens to say, like how do we level the playing field?
Beautiful. Definitely. Alexandra, do you want to go, or you want to just go ahead and go to the next one?
Well, so I would say the biggest things that did stand out for me, right, like is the thing that she called out about time and the cultural difference and association of time and the professional culture around time, and like who created that, right? And like, how is that perpetuated? And so what is the supervisor's attachment to time? Clearly, she has a very specific attachment to time, right? Late and not late. So there's a line that she's drawing there. She also related very easily to the candidate who looks and was like her, which shows that she is holding a whole lot of bias that she's not necessarily checking, because she had a difficult time getting to the skills that Raymond brought, which means that she hasn't even attempted to unpack what she's bringing and what she's assuming about the candidate who did what she did, versus like really trying to dig into the skills. Like those, I can almost hear
that internal dialogue. Like,
exactly.
Oh, wow, Ashley really reminds me of me at that age.
Yeah.
Right, where I can't figure out Raymond.
What's going on with
Raymond?
The preconceived notion that you have initially is like he's late. Yeah. So the minute that seed is planted in your head, you're like, oh, okay, well, this is not going to go well. And you're just like, wait a minute, no, that has nothing to do. Like, to your point, Alexandra, time doesn't have to do anything with skill and with competency, and as you said earlier, grit and things as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so next slide. Okay, so we're going to assume Ashley gets the job offer, and here are the supervisor's notes. Ashley appears to be a responsible and hardworking student. She has many extracurriculars that show her ability to be a team player and go the extra mile. Raymond was late, which makes me think he isn't taking this seriously. He seems to do the bare minimum at school and wasn't able to demonstrate skills or attributes that would be helpful in this role. So what assumptions is the supervisor making that could be false? What unintentional biases might be influencing her interview? So normally when we do this, we don't get to throw in our opinions, but that he seems to do the bare minimum at school always. I'm just like, what?
Every time I see it, it irritates me like nobody's business.
Like, based on what?
What?
On what? I know, and that's the thing. It seems to do the bare minimum, and it doesn't, demonstrate skills or attributes that would be helpful to this role. But you talk to a student that does YouTube videos and recreates reaction videos. Those are not easy to do. The amount of time it takes to edit, to make sure you have the right code, to make sure everything fits well, to meld them together to say, and you want to be a project coordinator to be able to do that, you have to have designated time to make this happen. So closure, we don't get to usually make our comments.
Yeah,
That
we do.
It makes us mad every time that we read it. We're like, but because we know that's true. We know that it's
Right.
true.
And I think there's another unspoken bias that like a lot of, and I experienced this in my career with hiring managers, is already when HR or, you know, anyone on the team is talking about diversity, already they're thinking in their mind that to hire diversity, it's a nice thing to do and we're lowering the bar on talent.
Ooh.
Like, and it's just not true. It's that it's easier for you to see the talent that looks like you and acts like you and has been indoctrined into the same culture as you. And also now, what is the risk of that? What is the risk of everyone just act like you're just cloning yourself? And especially in the tech industry where we're trying to innovate and disrupt, what does that do to the organization's culture?
And I think the things that stand out to me here, right? Bare minimum at school. Like, again, I think that's her privilege that's coming out, because even as somebody, like, I didn't have that privilege. I was a kid who had to work. And so, yeah, I worked hard at school and I got good grades, but I didn't get to do extracurricular activities. Like, not only could we not afford them, but I didn't have time because I was working. And so she is centering involvement at the school is this way of going above and beyond, which one has nothing to do with the other. Like, doing bare minimum at school doesn't mean that the person doesn't have the skills. Like, what else are they doing that they are growing and learning and participating? Because it's right, the well-rounded and experiences, like playing sports at school is not the only way that you get experiences in the world, and that you learn leadership skills and that you learn deliverable skills and project. Like, this is a project coordinator. You need to be able to break down a project and prioritize and accomplish those things, right? Playing sports is not the guaranteed way to do that. If anything, like, I don't think it has anything to do with that. And so making hardworking student show her ability to be a team player and go the extra mile. Like,
how do you know that? Like, how do you know somebody just because they're on the team does not mean that they're a team player? Just wanted to say.
And sometimes the sports culture can actually go against the type of leadership we're trying to create. Right?
Exactly.
Because it's more command and control. It isn't about a level playing field. It's about everyone having their role and staying in their lane and, you know, not questioning the coach. Right. So I don't know. And I also, this part here about Raymond that says he wasn't able to demonstrate the skills or attributes. Was it he wasn't able to demonstrate, or you weren't able to assess?
That part. That part.
Yeah.
Right. That's that. Yeah.
Because did you give Ashley a chance to demonstrate? Did you just say, Ashley, go and demonstrate? Or did you just make assumptions about Ashley and then assumptions about Raymond? Because you had to work a little extra hard because he was different from you. Yeah.
Ooh, yep, exactly.
Okay, Albina. Oh, yes. Okay. So here is what you and the hiring manager didn't know about both candidates. We're going to start with Ashley. Her mom found her the apprenticeship opportunity, pushed her to apply. She's not totally sure this is what she wants to do. Her mom made sure she was on time by picking her up early from school and driving her to the interview. The interview questions were structured in a way that easily prompted Ashley to reference her experience as a student athlete. For Raymond, until this year, he's been responsible for babysitting his younger siblings after school, making extracurricular activities impossible. He was late because even after carefully planning his bus route, the bus was late. Managing his YouTube channel requires a significant degree of skill in tech software, taking initiative, creativity, and public speaking, all relevant to this role.
I made an assumption about Raymond. I thought Raymond was an in-time person like me. I thought he wasn't seeing time as linear, but so I made an assumption.
And we do that. And that's the thing. Like, that's why this presentation is great, because it's that moment you're just like, oh, even though I'm on the side of women, I still made an assumption. And it's like, I need to check we have to check ourselves sometimes. And it's just like, trust me, I check myself all the time. Like, Obina, chill out, calm down, pause before you jump into something to make sure that you're thinking with a full open lens.
Absolutely.
Sweet. Next one.
Yes, please. Okay, so we're going to talk more about implicit bias. We're talking about how it's unconsciously developed, favors individual and group, may not align with endorsed beliefs, and it's malleable. I think that in group is so prevalent in just in general, right? Like, I think that is something that is deeply ingrained in people. I have this whole theory about like people who would join a cult and who wouldn't. And but I mean, but in some ways everybody has, right? Like Peloton.
Yeah. People,
Right?
yeah.
Like, so and I'm definitely a person who would join a cult, right? Like I realized that. I'm like, oh, these people are doing what I like. Absolutely, I'm happy here.
I think everybody would join a cult. They just maybe haven't found their cult leader yet.
Exactly.
You just have to find their thing. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think it's ingrained in us as people to find people like us or who like the things we like and do. And so I think that's the hardest one to really check and like make sure that you have taken that out of the equation when you are interviewing and looking at candidates.
And that's why it's so important to have that like diverse interviewing panel, because you're bringing in your in-group thoughts and feelings, and so is everybody else, but that also allows you all to check one another, right?
Yes.
And so if you do have too much groupthink or in-group happening at your company, you can't have that happen. Like, you don't have that safety net to check that bias and to work through it, right? Humans at our core are community seeking. That's how we survive. That's how we got here today. So it's in the reptilian brain. Like, you're not going to get rid of it, but we do need to make sure that we are working with it so that we don't harm others.
Absolutely. We need that rapid cognition to survive. And so a good book to read is Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, because it talks about that part of your brain that collects data over time to make those rapid decisions. But when those rapid decisions are causing harm to people and society, it's how do we now deconstruct what data has contributed to those harmful behaviors? And so that's not an easy thing to do, but you can slowly do it like this. You guys have mapped out a great way to do this. So
yeah, and I think even to that, Jasmine, it's a little bit of self-awareness too. I think that's the piece about it. It's like, how self-aware are you in the space that you're in to know that, okay, wait a minute, I do need to challenge, or, I do need to shake things up enough to where something's not right in what's happening. And I don't say like I like to shake things up personally, but I feel like there's times where I just ask those questions and I'm just like, well, wait a minute, I have questions all the time. Like before we even started recording today, like, we were talking about dogs and things like that. And you saw me, I was like, wait a minute. Yes, that is me. Obina has questions because that is a part of learning, that is part of growing and saying, you know what, this is what I thought this was, or this aspect, this experience, but something in my lifetime, my journey has changed that. Okay, let me step back and actually reassess just a tad so I can make sure that I'm aligned with a lot, whatever that looks like. So it says you're not aligned with endorsed beliefs. It's like, okay, it's not aligning with me now. Why is that?
And that is such a great strength for this type of work, is asking those good questions. However, if you're Black, Indigenous, or another person of color, if you're a woman, or any sort of underrepresented group, you are more likely to be seen as a problem for asking. Where if you are a white male, cishet, able-bodied male, you are seen as a strategic thinker, you are seen as a disruptor, as a challenger. And so I think that's another thing for people listening to this. Doing those inclusive interviews means that you're also okay with them interviewing you.
Exactly. Yeah.
You need to give them space, and you need to make them feel safe enough for them to ask questions, to understand that you're going to be a good employer for them. It's not, again, it's not about the handouts or it's a nice thing to do. Like, you are lucky to have this talent. We need to start shifting that mindset.
Yep.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have a list of biases to consider. This is not an all-encompassing or all-inclusive list. We have race, age, education, gender identity, culture, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, ability, religion, location, citizenship status, spoken language. Other ones we have talked about are hair, right? Like, so natural hair, different body sizes. We've talked about tattoos and piercings as being some that people hold. Their neurodivergence has been prominent for us recently too, thinking about that.
Yes, I mean, so obviously that this is not comprehensive, like comprehensive list, but it can go on and on. I think, you know, especially I had a fear. So I have people who are listening. I have locks, and so for years, it took me a minute. I've wanted them for so long as a spiritual journey piece of my life. But when it came to work, I was just like, that the societal piece and the systemic, you know, idea of like, oh, your hair needs to be cut short, or it needs to be a certain way for you to, you know, Jasmine, as you mentioned, to seem successful, to not seem as a threat, to seem as part of whatever. And then, you know, then I had to challenge myself, and I was just like, you just got to do you in that process. But it is a matter of like, you know, because some, like, I would say a lot of us fit in so many of these boxes, or so many of these categories. And so it's upon us, as when we're trying to, when folks are interviewing, is to remember that people are going to reach into so many different areas of themselves in the interview process, or just in the job, that we want to be able to nurture that and accept it as best as we possibly can.
I think one of the risks of like intersection, like thinking about things from an intersectional lens, is that everyone then says, well, we're all the same. We're all marginalized in some way. Like, it wasn't easy for me either. I had to babysit my siblings, whatever. But I think it's important to kind of look at this, not just as like yeah, we have a lot of diversity because, you know, we have a couple people in the leadership team that speak French, right? So it's really important to also say, okay, but what groups are the most marginalized? And also those groups are not a monolith. And so there's definitely levels of privilege and oppression within each of those groups, but understanding, like, when we're looking at it from that most marginalized perspective, what are the biggest barriers? Because once you start removing those barriers for the most marginalized, it becomes more freeing for everyone, right? Because we do fall somewhere on the spectrum, but it's not to look at that list and say, okay, check, we're done. We've got a couple different cultures here. We got, I think we got one gay person and one, someone who's Christian and someone who's Jewish. We're good, right? Like, it's deeper than that. And when you look at the caste system that we have, there are certain groups, like whiteness is always going to be centered. And so how are we really looking at it from that most marginalized lens as well?
Definitely. All right.
Okay, so we have a few key practices that we suggest businesses start, and that's evaluation based on potential. We really, really encourage people to see the potential in everyone. Every student has something they bring to the table, and it's our jobs as professionals to figure out how to tap into that. And to help them highlight that, right? And to empower them to be their best versions of themselves. Making sure that the process is really consistent and the same for every candidate. And thoughtful phrasing of questions. And so we offer just some sample interview questions to business partners to help them kind of get started in thinking about that process.
I think that one is so important, right? Having the same interview questions, because I can't tell you how many interviews I've been to that they are clearly going intuitively, they are making them up on the spot. They're not asking the same questions amongst all the candidates. Like, how could you possibly compare candidates to candidates if you aren't asking the same questions? Like, you're not getting the same information, like you don't have the same framing, like you can't evaluate that in an equitable way if you're not asking the same questions. And like, I feel like that part is such, like, feels like common sense, but is definitely not common practice.
And if you're in the habit of doing that in this aspect of your business, where else in your business are you just going by feeling and not data?
Yeah.
Right.
The
So
field facts.
yeah.
And common sense isn't common to everybody.
Nope.
That's a tried and true statement. I'm just like, that is facts. Most definitely.
Yeah.
Now,
Just before we move on, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of people don't understand the difference between when you're assessing for performance and potential. So how do you help folks with that?
I think part of the hiring practices that we do, Obina's team does a great job of really supporting students through that. And there's like different sections that are like, what's your favorite attribute that you have about yourself? And how do you see yourself? And so it allows students to really kind of reflect on that and put what they feel is their best foot forward, and highlight to potential business partners. I think we've also done a really good job of being intentional with business partners and being like, this is what to expect with a student, right? Like we have supervisor training where it's like, hey, these are 16-year-old people, right? Because people are like, oh, I've been a supervisor for 20 years. I got it. It's like, but you're used to dealing with adults, right?
Yeah.
So, and so there's a balance there. But I think that, yeah, there's just been some really intentional moves to support students going through that process. And I know, Bini, you could talk to that a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is. It's really sitting down with the students and speaking to self-advocacy and being able to say, you know, this is, like Chloe said, this is who I am. This is putting my best foot forward. This is what it means for me to be authentic in a lot of ways. And then from those things that we also talked with our, you know, with the students and the counselors and even from the families as well, myself and our director of business partnerships, we work really hand in hand along with Coley as well. Her name is CJ. We work really hand in hand to make sure that our messaging is the same when it comes to what truly is this opportunity. Like, as you asked, like, what is youth apprenticeships? And it is, again, it is that opportunity to blend these two worlds that initially were meant that people thought they should be separate, but they should not be. You know, there's opportunities for them to gel together in some way, but everybody has to meet each other at some level playing ground so that there is opportunity to grow. And so I think as Coach said, we're making shifts to really make sure we're imparting that knowledge and that information and that mindset. You know, change is tough for a lot of people. So even just small little changes here and there, you can see it happening time after time.
Yeah. And Coley, to your point, like the folks that are saying, well, I've done this before, I know what I'm doing. Research would suggest that they don't, because I've done a lot of research in this space, especially with gender, and white men are assessed on potential, where underrepresented groups and especially women of color are assessed on sustained performance. So they have to perform again and again and again and again before getting promoted. And so I think for our listeners, the important distinction is that performance is about what you did in the past, where you come from, your degree, everything on your resume. Potential is about what you could do in the future. It's about your behaviors. It's about how you're showing up. It's about, whether you have grit, whether you have not confidence, because sometimes that's not our fault, because in different environments, it may not be safe for us to be confident. But like, what are those behaviors that we can start assessing even at a young age, and also guiding a little bit? Because again, if you're looking at a younger population, they haven't even developed that part of their brain that thinks about the future yet. So of course they're not going to be able to, it's like mid to late 20s. that the neocortex is fully developed, where they can actually think about the future. And so if you can't even frame your thinking from a future lens, how are you supposed to be able to compete with folks in an interview when you have other things kind of against you?
Definitely. Now, kind of leading off of that, I think now it's like, okay, now we're talking about inclusion and what does it mean to establish a foundation? And we all know, like, the first couple of weeks of any new job, whether it is your own or whatever it is, it's always tough because it's, again, that's that change. You're like, okay, now I need to change my routine and I'm having to get to know new people, or I'm having to adjust to a whole new environment. And the idea of safety and space, like, do I have that here? And so that's what this part is. It's really connecting with, having everybody to think about. I always tell folks, think about your first 2 weeks. No matter how long you've been in your job, what was tough about it? What was scary? What was exciting? What do you wish would have happened? And that was what leads us into our next activity. So we're going to show this for the listeners. We have 2 students, and I'll read as much as I can on the profiles. So basically, these 2 students have now been hired as junior coders. The first student, her name is Jimena. She's a junior, 16 years old. Her quote is, "We rise by lifting others." And so, her likes are video games, Twitter, TikTok. She does not like public speaking, sports, nor being late. She attends her neighborhood school. She is bilingual. Spanish is her primary language at home. Aside from that, she is meeting through, apprenticeship. She does not currently know anything or know anybody necessarily within the technology space. And she'll be the first person in her family to attend college. But she works on a newspaper. She's all about troubleshooting. She does software programming and knows how to use that. Some attributes about her: she's introverted, she's quiet, gets excellent grades, very organized, and has a small group of close friends. All right, here's another student. His name is Nathan, also a junior, 16 years old. His quote is, "Don't talk, just act. Don't say, just show. Don't promise, just prove." His likes: he likes Fortnite, the Broncos, and travel. Dislikes homework, friendship drama. I don't think really a lot of people like friendship drama.
I don't think that's true. I think
Okay, well,
They are the drama, unless they are the drama.
Unless they are the drama, then they don't even know that there is drama happening. Being rushed. Nate's parents, a little bit of background. Nate's parents are both college educated. He choice enrollment. His mother drives him across town to get to school. He has an uncle who works in software development, so has had access and experience to what that is itself. Unlike Jimena, she didn't necessarily have anybody in her family, but that's where we're at right now. Nate has taken numerous coding classes. He wants to be a video game developer and excited about the opportunity. Some attributes about him: social and gregarious, competitive, athletic, and has a large friendship group. All right, so that's a little bit about both of them. Again, they're both very, very different in terms of what they like, what they don't like, and how they're culturally, how they've grown up, essentially. We didn't know all about their culture, but we hear a little bit just about what they're able to do from somebody who is first generation, doesn't necessarily have access to a lot of these things, and somebody who has had multiple access because of family members and just the nature of where they grew up. Now, some questions to think about. First question is, how can the supervisor make both apprentices feel equally welcomed at work? What is different about what they need, and how might the supervisor meet their different needs? So, Jasleen, right? So Jasleen and Alexandra, thinking about, again, the question I asked previously is like, think about your first 2 weeks of work, but now you've seen a little bit about these students and thinking about, what do you think what are some great moves to really say, okay, I'm bringing these 2 16-year-olds who are going to be coding, but they're two totally different personas. How do we bring them in to feel welcome?
I think give the space to ask questions. Like I would want to have a list of standard questions that are open-ended, where I can just say, what is it that you love about this work? Or what is it that energizes you? And what are you really curious about? What do you really want to be working on? And then also, just like from a needs point of view of like really feeling safe, is just like creating that environment where you're not like, because I feel like, and see, even as I'm saying this, I'm very biased because I'm leaning toward, as an extrovert, I'm leaning toward the introvert, to say, how are we making the introvert feel comfortable, especially if they don't want to be put on the spot to speak. And so I think I need to think also about like the extrovert will have certain needs. And I've definitely felt like that as an extrovert. I've felt in a team like very disconnected, where people are very quiet and stay to themselves. And I'm like, I can't
What do I
work
do?
like this.
Right, how do I do? Yeah, how do I navigate? Yeah.
I can't work like this because I don't know. Like, I'm here, I'm new. And so I think it's like recognizing that there's no right or wrong, and just being clear about checking your biases and then looking at what is the process that I have and who might feel excluded by this process, and how could I build more inclusion into the process. But really just like having those questions ready and having a space where you're just sitting down and showing people the ropes, like not telling them to go read this document or go do this, but really like sitting with them, getting to know them as a human first, and not making assumptions. Because even now I'm making assumptions based on what I just read. I can't even remember all the details, but I kind of made a mental model. I've put them in 2 boxes. And so how do we break through those sort of barriers? And because of course it's my brain trying to do the right thing, so I'm trying to put them in boxes to say, okay, she needs this and he needs this, but I've already made assumptions based on. And so I think it's more ask the open-ended questions, stay grounded, and try to figure out what their needs are and try to meet those needs.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think the biggest one, like ask the question, like, what do they need? And give them the space to articulate it if they know, but they may not know, right? Like I know adults who don't even know how to answer that question, who've been in the workplace for a long time. So like giving them the space to answer that. I feel for Jimena. I am very much like Jimena. So I feel like I could make that comfortable for her, and like a pathway. I would struggle to make it easy for Nathan and the extrovert, and just being like, I don't actually know what you need. Do you want everybody to talk to you? Like it would have to be more of a conversation. But also knowing your team that they're coming into, right? Like who could they pair with to help them in the ways that they maybe need or want? Like who is most similar to them on the team? Like, do you have a buddy that you could put them with and be like, okay, here is your go-to person, or I am your go-to person, and really outlining it for them and making it like almost over communicating the expectations, the processes, the systems, like giving them as many things as you can on the forefront, and then being like, okay, hey, how do you learn? Do you want to read it and then talk about it? Do you want to go through it together? And making the space for them to learn the way they learn versus the system, and like, hey, fit into the system, go push the button 15 times today and then you're fine. And creating that pathway of opportunity for individual needs and like how they can onboard. I know things that for me, not knowing what I'm doing or what's expected, or like not getting enough feedback, not having everything ready, like those were all very anxiety inducing things when I would come on to a new job. And the stories of like, if my computer wasn't ready, like, that's not a me problem that my computer wasn't ready, but now I am sitting there going, oh, I'm not working and now I'm not valuable and they're going to fire me. Right. And like, as a student coming in your first job, that would be huge. And
it's
then
nerve-wracking and it's scary and it's just unknown. I would say this, one of the first things that I appreciate about CareerWise and our supervisor at the time that did for Coley and I asked us, how do you pronounce your names? So we have Jimena. It's how does she spell her name? I think it's spelled.
Oh, nope, they paused. It's spelled with an X.
I think it's XIANA.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Obina has frozen there. One thing I wanted to speak to while we're waiting for Obina is also not letting your good and you're unfrozen. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, no, so I'm not even sure what happened. I'm not even sure what I left off at, but I think just the idea of names, I think is really important to ask how to pronounce, how to express that, because that alone has a sense of inclusion of like, oh, they're already asking me the pronunciation when I've so many years, everybody hasn't done that or they've gotten it wrong. And also, what you said earlier, Alexandra, in terms of a mentor, I think that's kind of what that is. And that's what we encourage a lot of our businesses and our supervisors to do is like, if you yourself are unable to stand into that mentorship role, I think it's definitely something that, connecting them with somebody who again, it's like the idea of like, oh, that group think, oh, somebody who's like them, but maybe somebody who could understands their experience, or that or may have had the same journey, and knowing that, okay, the journey was relatively the same, but we're going to have a different outcome. But let me just tell you what I did, how I overcame, so that you can also utilize the same skills at the same time.
Mm-hmm. One thing I wanted to mention, because I see folks doing this all the time, where they center their good intentions and they prioritize their good intentions over the actual impact. So let me kind of explain. So like, even with how to pronounce your name, if someone tells you that they go by Mo, you respect that. You don't push and say, no, I want to know your full name and I'm going to try to pronounce it, because you don't know where they're coming from. They may have said, done this a million times before, and everyone says they're going to pronounce it right, and everyone butchers it, and they go through the same scenario again and again, and then finally it's like, no, just call me this. And so I think let's not make assumptions about people's needs, because even as I was looking through that, I was like, oh, I'm kind of making assumptions about what the introvert needs. But if I were to then say, okay, I'm never going to call on her in meetings, I'm never going to let her speak, then now everyone else doesn't know why I'm doing that. And they're not seeing her as a future potential at the company. They're not seeing her as a future leader, like later on down the line. And she's already being pigeonholed before she even gets started in her career. And so this is such a critical time for youth, because this is going to set the tone for the rest of their career. And so really respecting that, even though they are young, they know what they need to thrive. They know what they need to thrive. And so, and also, like, you're still the manager, you're still going to challenge them a little bit, but have that conversation with, how can we do this in a way that is comfortable for you? Because at this organization, if you don't speak up, you get left behind. And maybe that's a problem with the organization, but at the same time, as you're that point of contact for that person to thrive where they are. And so how do you do that in the most inclusive way without being able to have a magic wand and change the whole system overnight?
Definitely. There's also something Chloe and I suggest to the group, is thinking about how to include the entire staff before everybody joins as well. That's part of the inclusion piece, is making sure that the staff is part of, the journey of this process of youth apprenticeships. You're going to have your hand raised, and you're going to have people like, I'm not really worried about it. But as long as people are a part of it, then nobody can say, I didn't know, or this is news to me. It's just like, no, we know this is happening. We're all a part of this journey. However you decide to lean into it, that's on you. And that says a lot about you in terms of what you want to do. But understand that as an organization, we are moving towards this, and understanding that this is something that is going to be beneficial, not just for our organization, but for these young individuals that we're trying to bring along at the same time too.
Love it.
Definitely. So, some things that we tell people just kind of think about when it comes to the inclusion of those first 2 weeks is connecting with your employees, kind of what I just said. Is really making sure everybody knows what is happening, that this is going on. Hopefully, again, you've had conversations with the folks, the youth that are coming in, to get a general glimpse and gist, and then also prepare everybody for that. Support and celebrate your employees' differences. So, we're saying like you're trying to decide on like, oh, this person needs that, but it's also like, I'm going to celebrate that at the same time. They're different, but I'm excited that you have a small friend group. That you have a large one, whatever I'm going to celebrate that, and know that energy can still happen here in the jobs, where you can know a little bit everybody, but maybe just like, I just need to know a few key people for me to help do what I need to do to make happen. Creating a resource group, or CareerWise has actually created 2 employee resource groups. We have Ebony Wise and we have Queer Wise as well. Because we realize there are, a lot of our folks in our organization, wanted, aside from just doing what we do and doing it phenomenally, we wanted to be able to still connect with each other on other personal life, cultural worldviews, to then, to just support each other and understand that, hey, our students are also a part of this as well, one way or the other, because we're bringing them into this world. So if we can emulate and be the example of what we hope all businesses are doing, if they haven't done so already, we want to make sure that happens. And speak up about inclusion, and not be silent. If you see something, it's like the idea of see something, do something. you know, and just being and speaking. If you see something that's just not right, or somebody saying that's something that's inappropriate, or you're like, ooh, let's check. You need to check yourself really quick. You know, I'm not one. You know, I will check people.
Yeah.
And Chloe knows this very, very easily. I do in
Yeah.
the most. I do my best to do professionally and you know, non-disrespectfully in any way. But I'm just like, well, hold on. Let me challenge again. The idea of challenge. Let me just ask you a quick question, because what I just heard doesn't make sense, or it doesn't vibrate. Something isn't happening. And if students see that, if they hear and they see somebody who's like, wait a minute, publicly, hold on, this wasn't right. Something isn't working. What's going on? No matter if they're extroverted or introverted, there's a piece of them, they're seeing it, because I'm a visual learner. So then they see it. They're just like, oh, I see that this is something that is possible, that people that look like me, or even that don't look like me, that may have the same values or ideals, to say, you know what, I'm not allowing this disrespect or hate to continue to emulate, or to ruminate within what we're doing.
Yeah. Silence is violence.
Ooh,
For sure.
silence is violence.
It is.
So, you know, I guess, and so that's kind of honestly the end of what we do. And then we just kind of end with the process of like, what questions do we have and how can we support folks? And then also asking them, what are they excited about this experience? You know, Alexandra, I kind of want to lean to you a little bit, because when it was your first time, you leaned into this third question. And, you know, and Chloe and I were just like, yes, we were so excited when it happened, because the energy and what you felt. If you can kind of talk about like when you first got involved with CareerWise and went through this training, and we asked you this question, what were the first things that came to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, the same reason why I am still super excited about CareerWise is the opportunities that this opens for people, and the pathways that can be illuminated that maybe we didn't have an opportunity to have those illuminated. And just like knowing that there's more options, right? Like more options creates more options, and being able to help people along their journey of understanding what's possible. Like I'm super excited about the future and what's possible. And like, that's where I live all the time. And I also sit in that, but why? So when people are like, oh, well, I have to do this and then this and then this, and they already have their lives panned out for them or planned for them, like, but why? And then people who don't, but why? And so this in and of itself, the apprenticeship program, CareerWise, being able to open those doors and to just be open to the possibility is the core of what makes me excited about it. And what makes me excited about the work that we do with the disruptors too. We're changing our society. We're changing our culture. We are in the middle of a dismantling process, and I am super excited for the future. And like right now is how we are building what's coming next. And the youth are what's coming next. Like they are coming into the workforce and they are shaping it. And I couldn't be more excited for how they want to shape it, because they clearly have been watching and took the lessons and we're like,
no, like, we're not doing that. We're going to do that. Maybe we'll do that. Yeah.
I maybe like this, but absolutely no to that.
Yeah. And so I mean, that's just the biggest piece. And I guess for you, Evelyn, as well, kind of the same idea of like knowing and understanding that there's an opportunity for students. I always tell students, I wish I had a me when I was in high school. I'm grateful for the path that I went down, because I don't think I would be here right now if I didn't go down that pathway. But to be able to know like, oh, there was more options out there for me. You know, do you think that if you were to go back to your younger self, do you think anything would have changed how you would have moved or grooved in life a little bit?
1,000%
yeah,
for me.
definitely. I think a lot of this for me, when I think of that excitement question, I'm like, wow, I wish there were more programs like this. I wish there had been more programs like this 20, 30 years ago. We're making it easy for folks who are saying, oh, I can't find any diverse, qualified talent. You're not looking hard enough. You're not working hard enough. We're not building that pipeline. And now we're building that pipeline. And I think just like being excited about like discovering what other gaps exist now. Like now that we're getting people in, like how do we now start what is your potential? Because that is like a super exciting question for me, is like each participant in this program, what is your true potential? And how am I getting in the way? How can I move aside?
Yeah.
How can I move aside and how can I amplify you? That's what because like, it's not about showing people and saying, okay, this is what I did. We can't just do that, because the world we lived in growing up doesn't exist anymore
At all.
We need to empower young folks. We need to teach them about what their potential could be and connect them to the problems that they want to solve. And then we need to get the F out of the way, right? Like we need to get out of the way. It's like, I think that's the biggest thing is like, how are we still getting in the way? That's what I'm excited to learn more about.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you sharing this with our community and out in the world, and, you know, amplifying what youth apprenticeship can be, I think is super important. But also, it's not just about having inclusive interviews because you are bringing in a youth apprentice. Like, we need inclusive interviews, full stop. Like, full stop, you need inclusive interviews, and being able to think about those things and be aware of your bias. Like, what is our process and our systems looking like, and what are they doing, and what harm are they potentially causing, and what obstacles are they creating that don't need to be there? And the same framework applies whether it's a 16-year-old or it's an executive who has a 35-year career behind them. Like, you still need to be in that inclusive mindset and the equitable mindset. Do you have anything that you want to close with that is super important that you want people to make sure that they took away from today?
I think for me, and we've said it just throughout, I think it's really stepping back and like, you know, checking yourself. I think because we don't do that often. We just kind of just jump in, but realizing that, okay, with the world that's ever changing, and like you said, Yasmin, like where it was when we were younger is not the same that it is now. And it's realizing that and understanding that for progress to happen, systems and ecosystems have got to change, and we must be willing and to be a part of that change. If you're unwilling, that's fine, but willing, it is what it is, but willing to be able to say, you know what, let's, as your organization's called, let's be that disruptor. Let's change that just a little bit and say, you know what, this isn't working and this is why it isn't working. I don't know all the answers, but let's think about ways we can get to a better outcome.
Yeah,
for sure. Coley, do you have any closing thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I think that really part of this work is leaning into discomfort, knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable, and really leaning into that to really learn and grow. It's just a part of the process. And as you do it more and more, you realize that there's growth in that, right? There's growth in the discomfort, and just professionally and personally, like we got to lean into that if we want to move forward.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, that discomfort is just recognizing that you're going to make mistakes, and you've been indoctrinated into a culture that said everything, you have to be perfect and you have to maintain your power and status. And so it does feel weird to let that go and kind of move into this space where you're saying, I don't know all the answers, but I'm willing to learn. So back to that willingness to disrupt.
Yeah.
And so where can people find you? Where can they reach out?
Yeah, definitely. I think myself, both Coley and I are on the careerwisecolorado.org website. You know, definitely just looking at the staff piece, that's where you can find us. But I think if anything, knowing that Coley deals phenomenally with our college and credentials, she really makes sure that the apprentices have the skills and are able to upskill themselves. And I think that's the most important piece. And then for myself, it's just, I'm all around. I'm a little bit everywhere just because I still recruit. Yes, I do a lot of those director things, but I also recruit. So I'm in the schools. And they can't get me away just yet. They can't pull me just, that's my bread. That's just where my heart is within the youth. Adults are cool. We're cool, but we've done it already. Let's talk to those who are trying to figure it out to make sure they don't do what we're doing. Because not everything we're doing is right. And, you know,
100%.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. That's part of disrupting. Like, we don't want them to do it the way we did it. And of course we had to do things the way we did it for survival. Like, it's not about saying, okay, we were dumb and we didn't know what we're doing. Again, the world was different. The world is changing. And so now what? Now what is possible?
Yeah. Definitely.
We know better, so now we can do better.
There you go.
Gosh, she's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us today. If you are an employer who is looking to bring on an apprenticeship program, please go check out CareerWise Colorado. It's phenomenal. They also have chapters in other parts of the country. So you can also, if you're not in Colorado, probably aren't, but there is lots of options all over the country. They have I don't even remember all the places that CareerWise is now. I know that there is some in New York, and there's like some other coastal.
Indianapolis. We're looking into getting into Arizona, to just name a few.
Yeah, so it's all on the website, so go check that out. This was a pre-recorded, so this will be coming out the last week of April. And then if you're listening to the podcast, you know, we're quite a few weeks behind from the LinkedIn Lives to the podcast itself. But wherever you're listening to us, we really appreciate it. If you are on podcast, make sure you rate and review us. Share this with somebody who you think might find it valuable, and feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. Jasleen, do you want to close with anything?
No, I think you said it all.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you for joining us. And we have some news that we'll release, but stay tuned for that release on a different episode.
Awesome. Thank you, Colleen and Bina, for joining us.
Thank you for having